Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and a couple of different people asked me if I would talk about how people actually get hurt doing the deadlifts, and I'll show you guys some screenshots because people will always say, nobody asked you that. Well, there you go, they asked me. And they did it after watching Brittany train, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to discuss this while I do a little bit of reloading and priming some brass here, because I find it relaxing. And if need be, I'll remake this video again in a couple days, voiced over some lifting, if that's what you guys prefer. I might need to do it both ways just so the people who learn different ways get the idea. But people have some major misunderstandings about how people get back injuries from deadlifting. And there have been multiple fitness, I'm going to use that term lightly, YouTubers who have injured their backs, who have over 100,000 subscribers, who have herniated discs and everything else. And yet people still listen to these people, and they still listen to the same cliches in the industry. And honestly, what's scary to me is that people really think the biggest risk on a deadlift is rounding your lower back. It really isn't. That only becomes a real risk when you have a really weak core or you're lifting just way too heavy. And I remember I had a bunch of people freak out on me when I was doing completely rounded back stiff leg deadlifts as an accessory movement with 450 pounds for work sets. You guys remember that? Yet I didn't get back injuries, and you didn't see a single strength and conditioning coach chime in and say anything. You see little pissant YouTubers come in and they say things who don't understand injuries, biomechanics. I always get people who want to criticize me on the deadlift stuff, and it's scary that they really don't know what they're talking about. Yet I'm the one who doesn't get the injuries, nor anyone else who trains like I do on the deadlifts. Coincidence? So, number one thing that causes injuries on deadlifts is not rounding your back. In fact, rounding the upper back, the thoracic region, is never, no expert anywhere that I'm aware of even thinks that that's a problem. No coach, no PhD in biomechanics, nobody seems to worry about that except people on YouTube and bodybuilding forums. And people who don't understand biomechanics. Now, rounding of the lower back can be a little more of a debate because for some people it can be problematic. But if you're working with sub-maximal weight, you're not grinding reps or taking things to failure, and you have a strong core, that isn't even going to hurt you. Complete rounding of the lower back, the lumbar, will not hurt you on a deadlift unless you're doing something else really wrong. So how do people actually get hurt? Because you see all these guys herniating their disc, and your fear there shouldn't even be herniating a disc. It should just be straining a spinal erector because your core is too weak. But herniating discs, that's your real fear. How does it happen? Well, a couple of things. Number one, too much control on the eccentric rep. And I know this is a big one because everyone's like, you're going to hurt yourself the way you drop it. No, I'm not. How? How could I possibly hurt myself doing that? No way humanly possible that turning loose of the bar completely and letting it hit the floor at the top of a deadlift, or a speed eccentric to where you just barely hold on to it and let it come down at almost free fall speed. There is no physical means possible by which that could damage your lower back. Now, you could damage your foot or something if it fell and bounced or hit your shin. I mean, you could get some sort of bouncing that could damage you, but that can't possibly damage your lower back. There's no physical explanation of how that could actually put stress on the lower back. It puts less stress on the lower back. How is that going to injure you? What will do it, though, is too slow of an eccentric. Everyone tries to control the eccentrics. Well, controlled eccentrics are going to cause additional micro tearing in the fascia around muscle fibers, which is not necessarily correlated with muscle growth, causing fatigue of your spinal erectors faster. That fatigue is what's going to lead to a higher chance of tearing one, of a true tear, because you're pushing stuff and people start training to failure and stuff like that while doing those slow controlled eccentrics. Yeah, they're at a higher risk of tearing a spinal erector with no additional muscle growth, because you can get the same muscle growth just by doing concentric only training with just a little more volume. It's not really worth it in terms of hypertrophy. And the other issue they run into, a lot of these guys, they'll do these controlled eccentrics and then they bounce the floor while holding on to it. It would be one thing if you're doing a Romanian deadlift. where you don't touch the floor at all on a controlled eccentric, a true eccentric based deadlift. The deadlift is a concentric based exercise. The Romanian is eccentric based. So that controlled negative, if you do hit the floor and it hits the floor hard, you transition from a really slow controlled negative to a jarring because you're still holding on tight to the weight under control, and then it jars and hits the floor. That is where you're at risk of injuring your lower back. Even worse, the guys who do it and then they bounce it off the floor. They don't even do a full reset. They just bounce and pull again. That leads us to the other thing that causes lower back injuries: jerking motions. It's not rounding that you're afraid of. It's jerking, and a sudden jerk instead of a smooth, explosive pull. Well, guys who use really lax form, who get real loose and just jerk it off the floor with a jerk, that's the people who get the most injured on a deadlift. And so when you do touch and go deadlifting, particularly with that slow controlled eccentric, you're now mixing two potential risk factors together, because you're taking that slack and that jerk that people have out of the bottom of jerky motion instead of a smooth explosive pull from a dead stop. So again, getting all loose and just jerking, and like their body goes into a tenseness and a jerk immediately from being slack. You need to be pulling in tight. That's why you see me, and then I have Brittany do the same thing, to where you pull the slack out of the bar and then you drop the hips just slightly to tighten everything up before you load the spine. People who just jerk without preloading the spine and preloading their posterior chain are the ones who are going to herniate disc because of that sudden jerking motion where they're not tight, and their core and spinal erectors are not tight around the lumbar. So when you do a slow eccentric and then a bounce, you're taking the extra risk from doing the slow eccentric, and you're combining it with the jerky bounce out of the bottom. And that's the people who are most likely to hurt themselves. How about Nick Wright? If that comes to mind, who totally damaged his back deadlifting with only 500 pounds. It's exactly what he was doing. Controlled eccentric, bounce off the floor into a jerk. Multiple risk factors. The biggest risk, all back-to-back put into one movement, is how guys like him hurt themselves. That's the guys who are going to snap their shit up eventually. So I would recommend the exact opposite. Always pull from a dead stop. Always pull after you've removed all of the slack from the bar and gotten everything tight, so that you don't initiate the pull in a jerky motion to where you start loose. You get tight immediately before you pull, and that's where premotor unit slack movements, like what I do, to where I drop down right before each time, and like I have Brittany do, reduce your chance of actually herniating a disc. And don't do slow eccentric reps, because slow eccentric reps give you the highest chance of pulling a spinal erector. So again, the guys who are really going to get hurt, or girls, are the ones who combine those two risks together. People who jerk from the bottom because they don't get tight, and the people who do the slow eccentrics, since they do a touch and go with the slow eccentric and they're already used to the jerk. So it ends up combining all of that together, and those are the people who, it's just scary statistically, because they're combining every single major risk factor of hurting yourself on the deadlift. And these are the people who then scream that deadlifts hurt people. People who watch them are like, well, see, we thought he used good form, and look, he tore himself up. But you don't see strong, powerful lifters with strong cores doing submaximal work hurting themselves doing a rounded back. But you see weaker guys who do slow eccentrics and touch and go, and who don't know how to preload the bar to get tight first. Those are the people who seem to always get hurt. So I would ask people looking at that, what's really going to get you hurt on the deadlift? Is it going to be a fast eccentric or some rounding in the back? Not if your core's strong and you know what you're doing. You're very, very unlikely to get hurt. Or is it the guys who jerk the weight up? They start like a limp noodle and they flop and jerk it up, and then do slow eccentrics with a touch and go. Well, it's very clearly statistically the latter are the people who keep getting hurt, and they keep getting hurt with 100 or 200 pounds less than what everyone else is using the other methods without getting hurt. It should tell you something. Again, I want to remind people, even a rounded lumbar on a deadlift can actually be an accessory exercise to make you better at your deadlift, to build a stronger core and stronger spinal erectors. It's not dangerous to do that at all if you know how to program it correctly. It is actually way safer than doing a slow eccentric. It's way safer than doing a touch and go, to where you don't reset. For those who don't know the touch and go, meaning where you just pop the floor and move back up, and you don't let it fully reset and come to a dead stop and reset yourself. I mean, it's safer than doing either one of those by a large margin, yet everyone on the internet wants to freak out because someone rounds their back, but they don't freak out when someone does a touch and go, or when someone pulls with like a floppy noodle just as they're breaking it off the floor and just jerk. It's just amazing that people don't bother to research these things further. They just kind of follow whatever trends are happening in the magazine world, or what bodybuilders do, who really oftentimes, with some exceptions, really shouldn't be giving advice. They're the ones who are going to hurt people. And it just amazes me what I see on YouTube. When you see so many people who are scared of deadlifting because of the injuries, we watch some of these idiots with big channels deadlift and hurt themselves over and over and over. And no one seems to grasp the fact that they're getting hurt because they don't know what they're doing. And yet they want to continue to follow them instead of people just learning the lesson of, hey, maybe all these guys who are getting hurt over and over have no clue how to deadlift. Maybe I should figure out what they're doing wrong instead of just accepting the standard answers. Oh, it just must be a rounded back. Rounded back is perfectly fine if you know what you're doing and your core is strong and you're training with submaximal weights. Maybe even for competition maxes, it might be okay for some people. I've seen less people get hurt doing competition maxes with a rounded back than I have seen people get hurt doing touch and go. Less people. That should tell you something. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.